And welcome to today's webinar. We are joined with Sean from Inventory Base, who will be talking about the risk report, five blind spots costing agents time, money, and trust, new rules, new risks, what agents cannot afford to miss in 2026. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the questions box and we'll answer them at the end. Alternatively, you can email events@propertymark.co.uk, where we can pass these over to Sean, and I'll now pass you over to start the webinar. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Kelsey, and welcome everybody. I hope you can see my screen okay. And yeah, it's a bit of a long title. We were just literally discussing this just before we started, but hopefully it's going to give you a lot to think about, because if you're going to be spending an hour with me, I want to give you value for your money, especially because it's a lunchtime, and I really do appreciate the fact that you're taking your time to sit and listen to what I have to say. So the 5 blind spots costing agents time, money, and trust. So I'm Sian-Hemy Metcalfe. I'm an Ops Director at Inventory Base, but I'm also a practicing professional in inventories, and I've been in the sector now for well over 13 years. So hopefully I've got a bit of an understanding of what it is that you do as agents, and also what are your pain spots, and also how I can potentially help you. So for the agenda today, we're going to be tackling something that has been draining, more than compliance has ever done before, and also about the hidden risks and the blind spots that are costing time and money, and also trust, even though often you may not realise this. So over the next 60 minutes, I'll show you the 5 biggest risk building in 2026 and what you can do to stay ahead. So the agenda will be around the new rules, new risks, the 5 blind spots agents can't ignore, practical strategies, and also an exclusive white paper at the end of the Q&A session. So let's look at the landscape. So we're going to look at what exactly is happening and the difference of once the Renters' Rights Bill beds in. Now, I'm sure that everybody's a little bit kind of like weary and worn around the renters' rights, purely because we just keep hearing it. We keep seeing things come through, then it goes back. It's ping-ponging at the moment. I always find that term really weird to think about it in those kind of contexts, but that's what's happening, and we already know that that's gone back, and it's not going to be seen till later in October. And typically I think we're going to be looking at royal assent probably on and around the 18th of November, because that's where most of the officials, all the legislation people, and also the MPs will be back from their conferences, and obviously any time off they take in the meantime. But for me, 2026 is where everything is going to really impact, and that's where the cracks will show. And landlords and tenants will test the rules, and what you don't want to be doing is being caught in the middle. And certainly indications are that disputes are rising, and already 51% of deposit disputes are for wear and tear. And I think that trend will continue. And also, we're going to be looking at hybrid working. So as of 2025, 28% of workers are hybrid workers, and 14% actually are now fully remote. And even though I know there's a bit of a push to get people back into the office, most of the time that these figures are remaining true. And with this, people are in the properties more and more, therefore wear and tear is going to be faster, depreciation is going to be bigger, and that is going to cause potentially more arguments and deposit disputes. And these costs arising from, use of carpets and sofas, redecorating, all of these are up around about 40% in recent years. And landlords, from my understanding and what I'm hearing anecdotally, are definitely feeling the squeeze, not obviously just from this area, but across, from all the other changes that's going on in the industry. And agents, you guys, often end up carrying the blame. You're the ones that are going to get it in the neck first of all, and then you've then got to try and sort it out. So for me, the real impact isn't just financial in 2026. It's also going to be about the time that's wasted and the time is eroded from you, and also what that does then in regards to the trust element. So homes are no longer than just homes, and the reason I say this is if you think about it, nowadays we're spending more time in the property than we are sometimes at work, even though we kind of are at work. But traditionally it used to be 9 to 5, where everybody would go off to work and then come back again, but that meant the houses remained empty, so therefore the wear and tear was less. but that's not happening now. And there's a disconnect there, and that is what's actually causing a blind spot that none of us, you and I, can really choose to ignore. And again, it's not about compliance. We often, and I personally do go on quite a bit about compliance, but it's also about, you know, the cost, the financial side of it, the time wasted, and again, like I said, about the trust being eroded as well as. So, you know, your homes, the rental properties are now being used as offices. They're being used as gyms, because people often will do a lot more of their home gyms now in the property, nurseries, and it is really showing. It's showing on the property from fair wear and tear. And this what causes a blind spot. So what I mean when I say a blind spot, if you think about it from a car point of view, it's the same way as if you look at it if you were driving. So you know that you know the other car's there or someone's there, but if you don't check your blind spots, you can't really see what's going on. You could be hit by something you didn't see coming. And in lettings, that's kind of like the same. These risks aren't hidden in the sense that no one knows about them, because I know you do, but often they're right alongside us in day-to-day work, but we're not really paying much attention to them. And that in itself will cause issues, it will cause accidents, it will cause disputes and costs. And again, trust. Trust is a common theme throughout this webinar, because it really does play such a huge part. And often we forget about it, because in a way it's kind of non-tangible. It's not something you can necessarily put a figure to, but it means so much. So we're going to check these blind spots properly and see how you can close them before they come or cause a car crash in 2026. So blind spot 1, what does that look like? So fair wear and tear standards. Now, anybody that knows me, I've been talking about this for quite some time, and the rules were written originally, and you'll see in the download that we've got for you, the white paper got for you, that it's actually been going on for a lot longer than you might even think. But they were written for a world where people left home, as I said, 8 a.m, came back at 6 p.m, but that's not the reality anymore. And like I said, with hybrid working, we mean that we're using carpets more, because obviously we're home more, we tread on them, we use them, sofas, appliances, they're all wearing out 30% faster than at pre-2020 levels. And often I use the example of, I've got a cream carpet, not probably a good idea, but I've got one. And I'm finding now I'm having to clean it more and more because I'm at home more and more. I work in the office 3 days a week, and I work from home 2 days a week. So therefore, I'm there, I'm using things, I'm touching things, I'm walking on the carpet, and I've actually noticed that I'm cleaning it a lot more. And that's a really good typical case where carpet, for anecdotal issue, where carpet was installed in 2018 and it was ruined by 2024, and the landlord said it should have lasted at least another 4 years, given the current scope of framework that we use in order to say how long things should work. Tenant said, look, it's from normal use, you know, I'm there, what can I do? Do I float above the carpet, or do I, you know, can I use it? And to be fair, both have got a point. You know, from a landlord point of view, is looking at the carpet going, look, this is worn out, it should have lasted longer. Tenants saying, well, look, I'm just using it, it's a carpet, I'm looking after it, but, you know, it's wearing. And that's where the framework hasn't kept up. And this is why we need to be able to benchmark wear patterns across reports, give impartial evidence, and basically stop these arguments from you know, spiraling. And the reason we need to do this is that you're wasting time. So agents, yourself, you're wasting hours mediating what is effectively an unwinnable dispute, because at the end of the day, you know, the tenant's quite right in saying, look, I'm there, I'm using it, just because I'm home more, you know, that's going to naturally wear the items out. But from a landlord point of view, they don't see it that way. And, you know, landlords are then absorbing those unexpected costs for early replacements. They're having to, you know, change those out, or maybe change them a lot sooner than those additional 4 years than they expected it to be. And again, tenants, from their point of view, they feel that they've been penalised unfairly. And then quite rightly, landlords will blame someone, because, you know, that's how it works when it comes to blame. Someone's always got to be at fault. And unfortunately, it's yourself as landlords, as agents, that will be blamed for that. So there's a need here. There's a need to change. There's a need to modernise the wear and tear standards. And, you know, we'll use real usage data, really understand what's going on with the wear and tear of these items so that you can utilise them. And in practice, that's about using inspections to reset, the landlords and the tenants' expectations, and also to make sure that, certainly from the tenant and the landlord's point of view, they got a real good understanding of what this actually means. But you can only do that if you're benchmarking. You can only do that if you are going to actually capture that information properly at the beginning of the tenancy, throughout the tenancy, and also at checkout, ready to then embark on the next tenancy. And this real inspection data, or real world inspection data, leads you to help modernize expectations and to be honest with you, cut that circular dispute that's going on at the moment. You can use tools, and one of the tools we've got is Base AI, where you can benchmark those patterns by taking good pictures, getting those details into the reports, and then utilizing those reports. But the main thing is you need to be able to capture it and make sure that everyone understands that. And the payoff for me is then it does, as I said, breaks that circular dispute issue. You're getting your staff hours back. Those staff members that are dealing with those disputes that are basically, as I said, are technically unwinnable, those hours are put back into your pipeline. They're put back into tasks that are actually going to generate revenue, going to allow you to increase that pipeline, or also build that trust, that relationship with the current customers that you've got, or the ones that you're hoping to bring on. And from a money point of view, that means that landlords avoid unfair costs and also replacements, but also it allows them to understand, when do I replace? How often? And what does that look like? And certainly from a tenant point of view, they see fairness. And whichever way you look at it, a tenant is a stakeholder in the lettings framework, because without a tenant, then the landlord doesn't have anybody to rent to. And from an agent point of view, if you haven't got a landlord, then you haven't got the business that you're there for. So it's really kind of like, let me rephrase it. I think it's really important that tenants are seen as stakeholders, and that they also see the fairness in the process, and that landlords also see the professionalism within you as the agent. So what you can then do then is make sure, certainly from everybody's point of view, all the stakeholders, that they've got everything they need and understand what's going on and help manage it properly. So that's blind spot 1. Let's look at blind spot 2. So these are deposit disputes, and these are on the rise. So a case study that I'm aware of looked at about sofa deduction that took more time than the sofa was worth. And this happens a lot. And you only have to literally look at what you've got from a staff point of view, calculate how many hours they work against their pay to understand what that looks like from an hourly rate, and then obviously then look at how long that case takes to manage. And if you're taking more time than the sofa is worth, then you're wasting time, and you're wasting effort, and you're wasting money. And a quick stat here is from TDS, where it handled 36,609 adjudications between 2022 and 2023, and over half were actually tied to wear and tear. So it's actually a bigger issue, going back to the first blind spot, than what maybe we actually give credit for. And then that says to me, well, do we not need to then look at our processes? Because it's draining agency resources, and it's also draining credibility from your agency as well. And if you think about, on average, each dispute takes 28 days. If you then just do a quick calculation, and I'm not going to do it for you now, and in a way I now think I should have had it ready for you, but 28 times 36,000 is a lot of days that are spent on these adjudications, and time that should be back in your pocket. But I did do a quick calculation from just a general time point of view, and you're looking between 8 and 10 hours from staff time on lost disputes. And depending on your agency, that might be bigger, it might be smaller, but that's still a lot of time. That is, a day that could be better spent elsewhere. And obviously those staff costs outweighs the disputed item value. So therefore, where is the value coming from disputing that? Is that being directed back to the landlord and the tenant relationship? Or is it the fact that we just need to manage it better and give the landlord more detail, more data to be able to understand exactly what that depreciation should look like, and then reaffirm their expectations, so you can help them manage what it is that they're trying to dispute? Because sometimes, and I know I've spoken a lot to agents about disputes, is that a lot of the time it's landlord not really seeing it for what it is, because they've got an emotional attachment, or they just want what they want and they just won't see the bigger picture. So of course then you then spend a lot of time trying to, you know, get round that conversation, trying to win that unwinnable dispute, when realistically you're probably going to end up in exactly the same position that you were at the thoughts at the beginning, i.e. not being able to win it. And then from a trust point of view, tenants then think there's bias involved, because obviously you work for the landlord. That is your job as an agent, to be able to provide the best service you can to that landlord. And of course, the tenant always feels as a byproduct as opposed to a stakeholder. And then from a landlord point of view, they will look at what's going on as a potential for negligence, i.e. that you as an agent aren't doing your job well. But it's not that, or that is not the case. The case is the fact is that you're trying to manage it, but obviously in a way you're hampered by the information and the data that you've got. So this is why there's a need to standardize inspections. There's a need to look at your templates, look at what you're capturing information-wise, timestamps, and creating audit trails so that you can understand exactly what's going on, when it's happening, how you can manage that. And that allows you to build defensible, impartial records, and then that can be trusted by all parties. And then that again goes back to blind spot one, where you're trying to build that trust and trying to stop the arguments from spiraling. And to give it some context, there's over 4.68 million deposits protected in England and Wales, and that's a TDS statistics from 2023. So that's likely gone up even more so. So if you think about it, that's a big industry to manage to try and get into a space where it's both manageable, profitable, but also then helps you manage that whole trust, money, an element, and build that viable proposition and framework to be able to manage all this as you go through. And the payoff for doing it properly is quicker dispute resolution. That in itself will create less admin for you. It cuts wasted time hours, you know, from staff for chasing cases that might be unwinnable, but equally also, you know, could have been dealt with faster if the records, the information, the data had been more consistent, and also then gives you the ability to again build that trust with all the parties, so that that impartial evidence helps landlords and tenants see that this isn't a bias situation, it isn't a bias way of working, that actually they can trust what it is that you're showing them and telling them, certainly from a landlord point of view, by giving them the right data at the right time and the right advice, and tenants to understand exactly where the responsibilities lie and also how they're going to be treated as they go forward. So now let's look at blind spot 3. So this is accelerated depreciation and the hidden costs that are involved in that. So again, a bit of a user case, portfolio landlord saw a 20% cost rise in 3 years and blamed the agent for bad tenants on the basis that their items were being used more, or they were having to be replaced quicker because they thought that basically the tenants had effectively been misusing the items. And that hasn't been the case at all. What it is saying is they're just they're home more, they're using it more, and the framework, as I said right at the very beginning, hasn't kept up with pace. And replacement costs are rising sharply because costs in general are rising sharply. You only have to look at your food bill, you only have to look at the bills that when you're buying items, they are costing more. And certainly from a carpet point of view, you're looking about up to 40% more cost than you were in last year and 2023. Sofas are up about 41% and redecoration up about 43%, both for materials and also for the contractors that you are using. So when you look at the stat, you know, that gives you a bit of an understanding in pound size, 138 to 196 a year, sofas from 63 to 89, redecorating 533 to 762 pounds a year, to give you a bit of a better feel around that percentage cost. So what that means is those costs are obviously landing unfairly on agents, because you've got to manage that conversation, you've got to get the contractors in, you've got to then effectively say to landlords, look, you really do have to pay for this. But the landlord's going, well, hang on a minute, this has got to be tenants' fault, this has got to be tenants' damage, when actually it's not. And that is causing issues around the relationship is not being managed, and expectations are clearly not as they should be. And this, from a time point of view, means that agents are firefighting complaints instead of managing portfolios. Now, I'm sure, and excuse me if I'm talking for you, but I'm sure this is not where you want to be. And certainly you're not going to want to feel that you're spending all your time just juggling these conversations, which generally 9 times out of 10 is exactly what you'll be doing. And from a landlord point of view, they're facing bigger bills. So of course they're facing bigger bills, then they're looking at raising the tenant fee in regards to the rent, or reducing your fee as the agent to make sure that they can draw that balance. And obviously from your point of view as an agent, you risk losing those fees if the clients exit. So if the clients are not happy, they're not going to get it, they're not getting what they feel is value for money because they don't feel that they're getting the right advice, or equally that the items themselves from a depreciation point of view are being correctly managed, then they might exit. So these are things you've got to think about. And certainly from a landlord's trust point of view, they feel blindsided, because they're dealing with everything else that's going on at the moment, with the renters' rights bills, with the impacts on the government changes, and also potentially what's coming down the road in 2026 with a change in budget, which isn't going to be into the end of November, right on Christmas. Not exactly ideal. So that's going to erode confidence quite quickly, I would argue. So for me, what you need to do here is look at the depreciation and life cycle data and get that right up in front in the landlord's mindset at the beginning of onboarding, or also on renewal. So really do a deep dive into their property that's furnished, and even if it's just white goods, because often we talk about furnished properties that are literally just white goods, and landlords think about it, well, that's not furnished, but there's still items there that could potentially be replaced. And then look at them as to how old they are, when they were last tested, when they were last maintained or purchased, and also then how likely they are to depreciate and need to be changing going on in the future. And by providing that information at onboarding renewal, you're giving the landlords much more chance of understanding what's going on in the property, what their expectations are in regards to replacement, the cost of it, and then spreading that cost and managing it much better. And that prevents surprise costs by showing landlords what to expect year by year. So of course, every single year of that tenancy, every single year you're holding that property within your portfolio, there's going to be depreciation. But how often do we actually talk about that? And then that, from a time point of view, from a payoff point of view, stops firefighting. It really does reduce the complaints and the callbacks, all of this wasting your staff's time and energy on things that actually, they don't really need to, or they shouldn't need to, because they shouldn't be firefighting when the bills come in, because the landlord should know what's coming in. You should be able to show them, and also then help manage that expectation, but also manage that cost through working with contractors, working, with preferred suppliers, where you can get a good cost so that the landlord doesn't feel that they're having to bear the brunt of all of it. And that, from a money point of view, means that they can budget, and that means there's going to be fewer surprise exits, but also fewer surprises for the landlords. It means they can manage their portfolio much better with all that information within their armory. A lot of landlords, beg your pardon, will only have 1 or 2 properties, but the bigger the portfolio, the more work, the more issues. However, I can already hear the argument in my head saying, well, yes, but equally portfolio landlords often have better expectations. Maybe you're single or a couple of properties that they manage, but that is not always the case. So again, I think having that information up front, they know what's going to need repairing. No difference as you do maintenance, then you can then make sure that the money is there, or the agreement to be able to dip into the fund that a lot of landlords and agents use to be able to fund issues and maintenance, etc., rather than having to ask for permission for that. And this, again, from a trust point of view, provides clear expectations. It strengthens landlord relationships. And it means then expectations and relationships are very clearly set out. Blind spot 4, what does this look like? So these are mid-tenancy inspection gaps. I know a lot of agents do midterm inspections, but also there's a lot that don't. And there's a case study not so long ago where a skipped midterm turned what should have been a £200 mould issue into a £2,000 repair. Now, we've got Awebb's law coming in as of next month, 27th of October. It's in the social housing sector, but the government has already muted the fact that they expect that the private sector also starts getting our house in order in regards to issues and complaints around that. And it also means that they're going to be keeping a keen eye on us, and so are the councils. So there's a lot there that they can potentially do if we find those gaps and those issues turn into not just a big repair, but also then a potential tribunal case and any of the costs associated with that. And My Deposits has actually said that 40% of tenancy damage is only spotted at checkout. So waiting till checkout, which could be 6 months down the line, and bearing in mind we're going over to the new way of tenancies where after 2 months it just carries on and on and on. At what point would you do those midterms, and what point do you wait until the checkout? And could that checkout be in 2 months' time, 6 months' time, 2 years' time, 20 years' time? You have no idea. So it's going to be a bit difficult to plan. So this is why the mid-tenancy inspections are really, really important. Because, you know, if you're managing all of that, it really does mean then you're going to be finding that there's going to be more and more issues that you're going to come across that could have been dealt with much, much earlier, but the problems were ignored, and therefore you've got bigger costs. And then the cost side of it is that it's going to take longer to firefight than it did to fix early. And I think most people would say, well, yeah, that's reasonable. That's an expectation. That's what I would think would happen. But how often do we actually manage it? How often do we actually, you know, work on that premise and then do something about it? And that means that from a money point of view, repairs balloon into thousands of pounds. Again, using that case example, 200 to 2,000. And depending on what the issue is, it could be substantially more. And then we get back down to trust again. And it's a recurring theme, as I was saying earlier on. Both landlords and tenants lose faith in the agent's diligence. They think, well, do you know what? You're not looking after my portfolio, and the tenant's saying you're not looking after my health and safety, my welfare. And from a collective point of view, they think, well, look, this is just not being managed particularly well. So what we need to do here, what I'm suggesting, is that we reframe the midterms. So we look at them not as midterms, but as risk checks and not admin tick boxing, because I see that happen a lot. Oh, well, yeah, I've been there, it looks okay, tick, tick, job done, 5 minutes in, and I'm out again. But it shouldn't be there. They should be risk prevention. And that means then you can take preventative action once you've done that inspection, and also means then it's, you know, small issues, you know, fixes that could have been done quickly or within a matter of weeks can save thousands of pounds at the end of the tenancy. And what it does is it proves that you're both diligent as an agent, and also that landlords feel and tenants feel supported, listened to. And it also means then you've got evidence to go back to the landlord to say, look, this is the issue and this is why it costs so much. And also from a tenant point of view to say, well, actually, do you know what, that's not fair wear and tear, that is damage, and that is something that you're going to need to pay for, and this is how we're going to manage it, rather than wait to the checkout and then everything blows up. And at that point, you're spending a lot of time trying to manage the fallout from it. So what I'm saying here is capture your photo evidence, log early issues, and act before they escalate. And this means from a time point of view, your end of tenancy battles are avoided, probably not in full, but they certainly will be mitigated down. And as I said, the £200 problems don't become £2,000 claims. And certainly, again, landlords see the diligence, and tenants feel that they've been looked after. And again, that is going to matter as we go forward, especially when we have the landlords database where tenants will be able to see, you know, is that good landlord? Is that a bad landlord? Is that someone that seems to look after the tenants? Or do you know what, they don't care? I'm not going to go anywhere near them. And that's going to impact you and your pipeline, and obviously then your bottom line, if that's where we end up. So blind spot 5, what does that look like? So this is data blackouts in reporting. So the case sample I use here is a landlord had left an agency because they'd had repeated boiler failures, but it couldn't be evidenced as a pattern because no one was actually taking this information down and looking at it to see, look, okay, well, hang on a minute, it happened here, it happened here, it happened here, but what did we do about it? Was it fixed properly? Was the maintenance done? Was the boiler too old, or did we, look at that when we onboarded the landlord or as the tenant went in? What was the maintenance and everything else that goes with that? And if you've got repeated boiler failures, it means then something's, one, wrong with the boiler, but two, wrong with the process as well in regards to how that's being managed. Now, that could be a landlord thing. That could be a landlord saying, look, I don't want to pay for it, just do the bare minimum fixes and just keep it running. But at one point or another, that is probably going to end up that it's going to have to be replaced or a major fix going in. But the landlord in this particular case left it because they said they couldn't see that pattern. They just kept on getting, we need this fix, but no real reasons as to why. And because the agent couldn't evidence the pattern, they felt let down from a landlord point of view. And one of the problems or one of the reasons why this is a problem is because 90% of agencies still use static PDFs. So, and this is an analysis that we've done here at Inventory Base. And what I mean by that is that you have the report, you put it in a folder, and then you don't do anything with it. So it's just static, doesn't do a thing. And that is no good. You want it to be live. You want to be looking at it and understanding and actually reacting to it when you get it, not at the end when it becomes a problem. And the issue then is that agents look reactive instead of proactive. And this wastes time in regards to staff rekeying or chasing old evidence because they've got to go and find it, they've got to put it in, they might have to add it to a new system, or they haven't added it directly into the CRM, or they've not done it in a format or in a way that actually they can go in and manage that data and understand it and purpose it. And then from a landlord point of view, that creates churn. And that churn is lost instructions and fees. And also there's a reputational risk there as well, because obviously if a landlord or landlords are leaving agencies maybe on a more regular basis than most, word of mouth still gets around. People still talk about it. And of course then, people then start to say, well, is this the right agency for me? Do I need to look elsewhere? Because clearly something's going on. And then that obviously affects trust. And trust means then you're losing credibility when you can't prove the patterns. So there's a need here for data insights to categorize your issues, to track reoccurring repairs, and build dashboards and understanding of what is going on. So here what you need to do is turn your inspection reports into structured, usable data. Don't put it into a PDF and put it into a file and leave it until the end of the tenancy. Actually look at it, read it and think, do I need to do something with it? Do I need to do an action or take an action? Do I need to install some maintenance? What is it that I need to do in order to make sure that the property is looked after, and certainly from the landlord and the tenant point of view, they feel supported. And this in itself will then allow you to spot recurring issues. So boiler, having to manage it and constantly deal with it and repair it. It gives you that pattern, okay, what's happening all the time, what happened every couple of weeks, because it keeps breaking down because it's only a patch fix and it's just not going to be good enough. So can we explore other ways of getting that boiler replaced? Government grants or any schemes that have been being done locally. And then that helps also from an agent point of view forecast risks. Because it then says, okay, look, your boiler is 20 years old when the tenant was onboarded. Like the likelihood is it should only be, able to last another few years. So we can forecast the fact that that is going to be a risk in the next year or so. So let's deal with it now rather than when tenant's in situ, and then it's going to be potentially more difficult and also more costly. And then that's a way of proving long-term value. And that in itself then creates what I would say is quite an obvious payoff. From a time point of view, there's less duplication, there's faster reporting, and it means then from a time point of view, from your staff point of view, they're not having to waste a lot of time managing these issues because they're all kind of already structured. From a money point of view, you're retaining landlords and instructions through insight, so therefore you can understand what's coming up, you can plan better, you can forecast better, and then landlords again feel that they're supported within your portfolio, within your agency, and that they feel that they want to stay on longer. And then you've changed that narrative. You've gone from reactive to proactive. And certainly from a landlord's point of view, especially what's going on now, they're migrating towards agents who are giving them advice, guidance, saying, look, we can sort this out, we can do that for you, we can help manage your maintenance problems, we can look at your depreciation values and really understand, you know, how your portfolio is going to manage, and then obviously set a realistic rent fee that will take all of this into account, because again, once the Renters' Rights Bill comes in, there's going to be a change out with Section 13. So, you know, changing your rent is going to be much harder, and you're going to have to prove it. And just because you haven't maintained the property won't necessarily be a good enough excuse. So these 5 blind spots, I said, they cost time and money, but the damage that lingers is lost trust. And to close these 5 gaps, you don't just protect your hours or your margins, but you're protecting the confidence in your agency. You're protecting what it is that brought your landlords and your tenants to you in the first place. So let's look about closing these gaps. So update frameworks. So first one, modernize your wear and tear standards with real usage data. Don't use benchmarks from 2020 because they just don't work. With 30% now hybrid working, your carpets, as I've said, sofas, your white goods, everything's wearing out faster. I said, even if you just look at your own home, and like I do with my carpet, I can see it, you know, it's grubbier. I'm having to clean it more because I'm there more. It's common sense. And it means then you're left refereeing disputes where both landlord and tenant are technically right, but how do you then broker that issue? So you've got to look at modernising those standards, look at your inspection evidence, reset those expectations with both parties, because without this, you'll keep losing time to circular arguments that effectively cannot be won. So consistent evidence, standardize your inspections with templates, you know, use the same one each time, know what it is you want to ask, how you want the information displayed, talk to your inventory providers or your risk assessors and say, look, this is what I need from business point of view. Not only do I need the descriptions and conditions and comments, I need the actions, I need to be able to forecast, I need to have the good enough detail to be able to manage it, and also then work with it to be able to provide that data insight to then feed the rest of the mechanism, the framework that you use to manage your agency. And that includes timestamp photos and audit trails, because that gives you timelines. It tells you when you had the property, when you had the item, depreciation value, when you changed it, and what the expectation is. And that all builds defensible, impartial records that, again, trust comes into it by landlords and tenants, and of course adjudicators, because if you more information you provide to the adjudicators, likelihood is that less disputes you will lose. And you don't want to be caught out by not doing this, because it all undermines credibility and costs time in regards to staff. That impacts money, impacts bottom line, and you want to resolve disputes as quickly as you possibly can. Forecasting. So, you know, share your depreciation life cycle data. Nothing damages trust more than surprise bills. So landlords, as I've said before, feel blindsided when suddenly, you know, they're facing a higher replacement or redecoration costs, and agents, you guys get the blame. So we can close this gap by building cost forecasting into your routine processes, showing landlords what to expect over the life cycle of a property. And, you know, if carpets are going to cost more, then factor that in, and also factor in the contractors' costs as well, because they have gone up. It's much more difficult to get contractors these days, and because of that, their fees have gone up. So of course you've got to factor that in. It won't get done for free, not unless you're really, really good at your job. And if you do, well done. And then bring this data into onboarding and renewals. You know, make sure it's available to everybody that's involved in that process, so that everyone can understand what's going on, and also say, well, at this point we've got to do this, and that's going to be the cost, and this is how we're going to manage it, and have solutions. So it's better to have expectations set right up front, and that will avoid you from firefighting much later down the line. And then, of course, you've got your preventative inspections. So for me, skipping midterms or treating them as a tick box exercise is one of the most costliest mistakes an agent can make. And of course, I would say that because obviously we're an inventory company, but I've been a provider and I've also been a landlord myself, and I know what that looks like. And if you are thinking about, you know, the 40% of damage is only spotted at checkout, it's too late. You know, you've already caused a lot of problems, which actually, if you dealt with it much earlier, again, using that mold patch of, you know, 200 going to 2,000, if the repairs and the issue has been addressed really early on, then it wouldn't have ever got that far. So for me, you can reframe your midterms as midterm inspections or midterm visits, but they're also as preventative tools. So it's about spotting the risk early, not ticking the box, doing the good, bad, and ugly, as I put it, just saying, well, that will do. Really look at it and understand it, because I said it will save you time, money, effort, build trust, but also keep you out of dispute and keep you away from councils as well. And saving time and staff money means that you're showing diligence to landlords and tenants alike. Again, they're all stakeholders in this process. And then with your data insights, you know, those agencies that are just treating inspection reports as static PDFs and just put them in the drawer until they either do need them or never even give a thought to them until all hell breaks loose at the checkout. You know, you can turn those reports into something really, really meaningful, and you can unlock them and use them for forecasting, use them to highlight recurring costs and improve that long-term value to both the landlords and also the tenants, because they can see that you're trying to, you know, help the landlord themselves manage the property. And it takes your role from being, you know, just an agent to being someone who's a trusted advisor, not a problem solver, and effectively get ahead of the curve, because then, you know, you're not allowing issues to occur or reoccur or look reactive instead of proactive. So it really does make a difference by utilising all of that information, because it's at your hands. It's available to you. And if you're using inventory-based software, as soon as you hit the complete button, then that report will be with you or with any stakeholder that you put into your contacts, into your CRM, into your maintenance workflow, and it's being utilised. So make sure you give it enough attention in that regard. And those savings, you know, because often, you know, that's kind of like where hopefully I might be able to garner some of your interest, because I get that's a lot, and probably also saying, well, do you know what, I know that, so you're kind of like telling me what I already know. But if we put it into figures, you know, if you look at updating the frameworks, that could prevent 1 in 5 disputes. So, you know, saving those 28 days to resolve it. And obviously that's a TDS date, 28 days, but, you know, think about the amount of time you actually spend within your own agency dealing with this. And then you've got your 5 to 6 staff days a year, where, you know, and then I average this out on 100 managed properties, so it's going to be bigger or smaller depending on your portfolio, and also how that drains the amount of staff time that you've got. So if you're losing 8 to 10 hours of staff each month, it's going to mount up. And of course, then, you know, if you can cut that resolution, you know, save that time, you know, you could be looking at 50 to 60 hours annually of that staff time to help you manage and put back in your pipeline, put back in your pocket for you to be able to manage that much, much better. And then obviously you're forecasting, again, looking at it from a point of view, well, what else can you utilize that information for to help the landlord manage their expectations and their cost, and also make sure there's nothing surprising coming down the line. So make sure that exits don't come from surprise costs and not through regulation, because regulation you can still manage, as we are with the Renters' Rights Bill, but it's surprise costs, that's what gets a lot of landlords. And I know for a fact, as an ex-landlord, I had exactly the same problem, and it's one of the reasons I moved away from my agent, because they didn't look after the property, and it could have been prevented if they'd done certain things, including a proper report, and that caused me to move. So forecasting, you know, could even, you know, even if you did it and it stopped one landlord from walking, you've already protected over £1,000 in potential annual fees. And from a preventative point of view, you know, again, goes back to the mold patch, one missed term, you know, could wipe thousands off a landlord's balance sheet. So spotting those issues early could move you from expensive claims into really quick fixes, and that protects both money and trust. And then your data insights, you know, a lot of the time we talk about data, and I know I've been in agency offices when you're doing your morning meetings and you're talking about the data, what's going on, what's happening, who's got what, where the percentages are, you know, what you're expecting in your pipeline that week. Yeah, that's all data. You've got loads of data in your report, but you won't utilize it if it's stuck in a PDF, if it's stuck in a drawer, if it's stuck in a CRM, and it's just sitting in and no one's paying attention to it. So, you know, by utilizing it, you could reduce churn by 2%. So that's 10 landlords in every 500 units, and that could be £12,000 worth of fees. You know, again, generalized. It could be smaller, it could be larger, depending on your agency, but there's money to, you know, to be had by reducing that churn. So, you know, if you're looking at 500 properties, I just did that quick calculation, but what that does do, it says there that, you know, your potential saving could be anything between 30 and 50k a year based on 500 properties, just by paying attention to these 5 blind spots. And, you know, for me, these aren't theoretical, these are based in fact, they're hard, they're measurable savings that can come from closing those blind spots, from, you know, implementing those frameworks, consistent evidence, you know, don't miss your midterm inspections, do your inventories, do your checkouts, utilize the information, but use it to also to forecast and prevent those issues coming up. And that way you're closing your 5 blind spots and future-proofing your agency into 2026, because that is when everything is going to hit. We might have royal assent this year, but next year is when the change really comes. And if you're then closing those 50 to, beg your pardon, if you're closing those blind spots and you've got about 30 to 50 across those 500 properties, you're not only saving the money, you're saving trust as well. And that keeps landlords with you. It keeps tenants on side. It keeps disputes out of court. It means then that, you know, you are making sure that certainly from your point of view, you're doing everything, you know, your agency can possibly do to manage the portfolio, manage the client relationship, and give, you know, both the landlord and the tenant the best service that you could possibly provide. And that's exactly what you want, because then that in turn will allow you to charge the fees that reflect that level of service. And that's exactly why, you know, what our white paper, Redefining Fair Wear and Tear, is designed to help you to protect. So we've done a white paper, and it's a comprehensive paper, and it's looking at, you know, benchmarks and framework and how to reset expectations in 2026. So we've done a download for you. You can scan the screen now and be able to get a copy. It will give you an immediate copy and also send one to your email. So I'll give you a few seconds to take that, but don't worry if you're you know, listening back on demand, as the phrase is often used. You'll be able to get a copy of these slides, and also we'll be giving a link to Kelsey, to Property Mark, to be able to share with you as well as. And obviously we would like also your feedback on that. So, you know, do feel free to let me know what you think and what else maybe we could also be talking about. So I hope you found that useful. I am hopefully on time now, and open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sian. We haven't had anything come through yet, but we'll give it a few seconds in case anyone has any questions for the chat box. But we do encourage people to email the events inbox and Sian herself. Do you have an email address you'd like to give out, just in case, Sian?
Yeah, so my email is sian@inventorybase.com, but you can also email sales@inventorybase, and you've also got our website here on the QR code as well. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, either, like I said, now or at a later stage. Like I said, the slides will be available. I understand the recording will be available as well, Kelsey?
Yes, that's right. We'll send that out with any links that you have as well, and with the slides separately if you wish.
Lovely. Yep, that sounds good. So if there's no questions, that's great. You know, I appreciate an hour is a long time to be being talked to. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it a little bit different. And even if your blind spots are, you know, in not necessarily in your blind spot, hopefully it'll give you a bit of impetus to actually maybe go revisit those areas and think a little bit differently as to how to help you manage those key areas. Again, if you've got any questions, I'd be very happy to help. So feel free to contact me at sian@inventorybase.com, or you can set access through our website.
We have had a question that has just come through. So the first question is, with regard to carpet wear and tear, where will yourself and clerks be differentiating between standard wear and tear from a family compared to those with dog damage to carpets?
Well, that in itself is in a way straightforward, in as much as that damage and fair wear and tear is completely different. Fair wear and tear is what you would normally expect through the normal use of a property. So carpet pile will get flattened because you're walking on it. There might be minor scuff marks on walls, but if there's damage from a pet, i.e. that cats tend to claw at the door edge and will pull the carpet back and thread it because they've done that. That is not wear and tear, that is damage, and that is something that a seasoned and professional inventory provider will be able to determine. If we're talking dog damage, that could be feces in the garden area. Again, that is not fair wear and tear, that is damage, because it could be damaging the grass, and that's something that it should be cleaned up by the tenant, because it's within the tenant's responsibility to do that. Similarly, we've seen issues where dogs have been chewing at the edges of a door frame. Again, not fair wear and tear, because what I would expect on the door frame is odd scuff marks, minor chips, because we knock things, we move things, we touch things. You know, no one lives in a tenant property and without touching. But if you're seeing those kind of claw marks or chew marks or scratches, that is not fair wear and tear, that is damage. So that differentiation is actually really clear. The issue with where we're looking at the moment is we're expecting carpets to maybe last 10 years, but or decoration should be done every 5 years. But because tenants are living and working in the property, so they're there more often, that is being accelerated. So of course, then if you apply that same framework, it doesn't really marry up. So the property might require recarpeting much earlier than the 10 years, not because they've damaged it, just because it's worn out.
Perfect, thank you. We've had another one come in. If a landlord has to allow a tenant now with a pet under the RRB, can it not be argued that this is now expected wear and tear and part of the risk of having tenants?
Yes. And that's the other part of the framework that's not really thought about, is the fact that, you know, tenants will allow pets, and depending on how many, because at the moment the Renters' Right Bill doesn't say you can only have X amount or X type, but obviously it has to be looked at from a property point of view. You wouldn't put a Great Dane in a studio flat on the 17th floor. However, I did hear, I think it was last week over in Ireland, where a landlord found that the tenant had been looking after a horse in their sitting room. So it's going to cause damage, you know, whichever way you look at it, it's going to, because a horse, just one, shouldn't be in there, and two, I can't imagine, you know, a lounge being big enough. But again, yeah, they're going to be living there. They're going to be, you know, potentially scratching things, but also just, you know, being present in the property. So that wear and tear framework really does need to be looked at, because how do you then differentiate? Damage you can, but wear and tear is much more difficult. I mean, at the moment we've got frameworks, deposit dispute services use frameworks, but are they now really fit for purpose for how we work today?
Thank you. They are all the questions that we have had in. Thank you for doing the webinar today, Sian, and everyone who has joined, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you.